Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to review Season 2, Episode 1 and 2 of American Gods. So, recently I'd ultimately wrapped up Season 1, and so ultimately I'm just going to do this video as well. Because ultimately I kind of have to separate the seasons, and for that reason I'm just like, I already saw all 4 of these episodes. So reasonably, why not just talk about them and talk about how I either enjoyed them or ultimately I'm just kind of like, they were just there. Um, really, really going into these 2 episodes, I really thought I'm like, man, it really feels, especially in these 2 episodes, I'm like, man, there's really a war brewing, and it really feels like they're like people are choosing sides. And I thought that that was actually really fascinating within these 2 episodes. That it's like, hey, man, like a war is going on, and like, yeah, we have people that are in Mr. Wednesday's tent, and we have people that are in Mr. World's tent, and then there's also some people that are ultimately trying to be neutral, which ultimately Vulcan was, but really he turned himself into Mr. World anyways. Um, so going into these episodes, I thought that the episodes were really fun. Um, I think there were some times here where I was like, yeah, like this is like really, this is kind of picked up a little bit more than I think some of the episodes were in the past. But when also looking at it, uh, I did like some of the like solo Shadow Moon stuff. Where ultimately he was, uh, like I think the Shadow Moon stuff where Shadow Moon was kind of desperately trying to put his life back together, and the heartbreaking process that was really fascinating to me. And ultimately I just kind of miss those times. Like I kind of like, it seems like Shadow Moon has so much around him now, and that he's not on his own, that it's like, man, I kind of missed those moments where ultimately like Shadow Moon was just trying to figure things out, and he was having a really crazy time to be able to do that. But now there's like people around him like all the time, and so like now we have this like real like ensemble piece, and I'm like, yeah, that's great, but I miss out on little like little things where just Shadow Moon is on his own. It's fun. Or it was fun. So going into these 2 episodes, I hope to get them all accurate and whichever one have you, but when looking at it, there's a lot going on in these episodes. I found them to just be like fun, but I think like the second episode is just kind of like, we like I kind of felt like that was like dragging a little bit to just tell us like, yeah, there's a war brewing, and we gotta like make people, like we gotta take this slow approach to ultimately just have people like, well, should we go into war? I'm not sure. Maybe somebody has to come up with a speech of sorts to ultimately just want to have me go into war, and then maybe we'll all do it. And I'm like, man, that's a little bit of like slow, like drawing this out. Like ultimately, they're just kind of like how slow can we do this show? How much can we just kind of like trickle a little bit in there? It kind of feels like they're a little bit of like trying to slow this show down as much as possible, and I kind of don't like that. But I don't know. I think the episodes are just kind of like the things that they are doing in these episodes. I'm just kind of like I'm enjoying them. I find them to just be. Just kind of visually interesting, and I just like the way of which they approach these. So I ultimately thought that the very first episode, tying in Easter, I think was really fun. And I think the episode that happens after that is just kind of like, okay, well, let's get all the chess pieces together, so to speak. Let's ultimately have Mr. Wednesday ultimately finally telling us who he really is, and ultimately, like, again, just kind of like basically like going like, oh, okay, well, like, I'm gonna ask this person to work with me, and this and that and this and that and all these characters that you guys have probably seen through any number of the other previous uh, episodes in the season, and yada yada yada. So going into this, uh, really, I thought that this was just kind of like we need to have like kind of make people believe that really there is like a god for everything now, or there's a god for every single thing here, and so reasonably we have to have like the god of basically every, and I just thought that that was kind of like, really, I thought it was just kind of like, yeah, like we're really kind of stretching this out that there needs to just be a god of everything. But I don't know, I just kind of thought it was fun. A lot of people could say it's like stretching a little bit, but I think it's fun. So, anyways, yeah, I thought that these episodes were fun. I thought they were just kind of like, I didn't quite understand every little bit of thing that came out of these episodes. Like, I kind of didn't understand what they were doing with Shadow Moon in the second episode, like why they were like uh, why he was kind of hooked up to things. Let's just say in episode two. Um, I didn't quite understand that. Like, what was the like trying to figure out like Shadow Moon's background to again have another kind of flashback thing that they had to go into. I was like, nah, like I don't like flashbacks. Flashbacks just like filler of time, milking out. Like, I don't like the flashbacks, but like and plus two, if they were gonna do that, like I wish that they could have done that in season one. Like I wish that they would have done that earlier on to just kind of get that out of the way. Because ultimately we are already invested in Shadow Moon. Why do we have to have flashbacks now in season two to have us invest in Shadow Moon even more so? Because we're already invested in a character that now we have to be still invested in? Sure, alright. Whichever, I guess it's just pulling from a book, so it is what it is. So, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say in a quasi non spoiler ish like thing. Um, I really like how like media and Mr. World and Technical Boy are having like a united front, and like I think it's kind of interesting how like we're getting this consistent swaying back and forth of ultimately having like Mr. Wednesday coming to one person ultimately asking like, hey, like, you want to be on my side, and ultimately you have media and Mr. World and Technical Boy all going like, no, you don't want to be with him. You want to be with us. And so ultimately you also have like gods that are ultimately just like, dude, like, I'm not going to go with anybody. Like, F it. Like, I'm just going to, like, no. Like, I'm just going to be on my own. Like, F all y'all people. Like, I'm just going to do my own thing. Like, I'm sick of this. So, reasonably, I think that's all I wanted to say about these two episodes. Um, just yeah, really hitting their stride, I think. But again, there was some just stuff that happened earlier in season one that I just thought was like, man, like these are some fun moments that really hooked me, and I'm just waiting for those moments to happen again, to where it's just kind of like. I love the whole confusion of Shadow Moon. Those were like the most brilliant parts. But I think now we're gonna 100% lose all of that, and like Shadow Moon is just gonna be in this, and that's just what it's gonna be. So, anyways, let's go into spoiler times. Let's break out that double five to otherwise talk about these episodes. Again, as per usual, I'm going to mention I don't know how much detail I'm going to go into every one of these episodes, and so reasonably, I'm trying to like as much time taken to do these reviews as humanly possible. So we're just gonna probably maybe have to just kind of rush through some of this. But anyways, let's go into season 2, episode 1. So reasonably we have it to where, of course, Mr. Wednesday and Shadow Moon are ultimately getting a suit made by Mr. Nancy. We ultimately also have it seemingly be uh, where at some point Death and Mr. Bilquist are ultimately, or Mr. Bilquist, Mr. Ibris, is ultimately talking about them doing work on a person, and ultimately Ibris ultimately writing for somebody. I think that might have been in maybe episode, or that might have been in the first season, but I probably forgot about all that. And ultimately, it was kind of a mood thing to even mention, anyways. But anyways, moving on. We have it to where Mr. Nancy is ultimately giving a suit to both Mr. Wednesday and Shadow Moon to prepare them to ultimately meet the god of Easter. Which ultimately, like, I liked how like we get a kind of change of Shadow Moon once we go into this mansion that ultimately is all Easter, and we have like bunnies pooping out like candies and stuff like that, and like all kind of funny, interesting things. Um, we have it to where Mr. Wednesday is telling Shadow Moon, it's like, yeah, don't fall for this girl now. Like, I know how like bright and nice and everything that she is. And like again, I just kind of liked how like Shadow Moon's like, yeah, I really love Easter, and like how his like eyes just like bright up at like, and how he's just so nice and everything like that during this portion. And because normally he has to play this like really like guy, and he has to kind of just like play this like this real menacing character. So this is kind of a bright spot for him. So we have it to where Shadow Moon is going into this mansion and ultimately trying to seek out the god of Easter for Mr. Wednesday uh, to sway the god of Easter to work with him. Uh, Ultimately, even telling a lie about the fact that Vulcan had made a sword for him, and ultimately Media and uh, Mr. World and Technical Boy killed Vulcan, which was a lie. Uh, and to ultimately, I guess, have it to where Mr. Wednesday is trying to sway the god of Easter onto his side, justifiably, really just going like, hey, like, if you don't join up with me, like, you're going to die by their hands. So we have it to where also the Leprechaun and Laura are trying to make their way to this uh, mansion. Ultimately, we have it to where they no longer have the taxi cab, so they end up stealing a ice cream truck instead, which I thought was hilarious. So they steal an ice cream truck and they are on their way to ultimately this mansion to ultimately have the god of Easter try to resurrect Laura. Um, while also in this mansion, we have seemingly several different variations of Jesus. And like we have like 20 different Jesuses in this place, which I thought was interesting. Uh, and eventually we have it to where Shadow Moon eventually talks to Jesus and ultimately talks about belief and stuff like that. I thought that was really interesting. That moment where Jesus is supposedly like just like sitting Indian style in the pool, and ultimately he drops his drink and he's like, ah. So we ultimately have it to where ultimately Mr. Wednesday is really trying to uh, sell the God of Easter on joining with him, and because ultimately Mr. Wednesday desperately needs a queen, and so ultimately he's just like, well, like God of Easter is going to be my key player. So we have it to where media ends up finding the God of Easter and ultimately talking about uh, like their connection. And ultimately, like the media wanted to talk with her, and so ultimately the God of or the God. We ultimately and I ultimately found out that Mr. World is the god of globalization, which I'm ultimately like, yeah, but I don't even know what that means. Like, I don't like. I guess like when looking at it, how really you could say that almost everything is connected, or how when you go to like a big corporation, ultimately they'll talk about synergies and stuff like that with everything, and how you're talking about how a lot of products are trying to uh, like cross platform and stuff like that, so that way they can get more like of a universal kind of feel. So ultimately, that's kind of like Mr. World. He has like a universal kind of feel, which I thought was just kind of fascinating to find that out. So going into this, uh, and we have it to where Mr. World seems like he is calling himself like the god almost, which is not exactly true because really we just have it to where media and Mr. World and Technical Boy are ultimately just calling and dubbing themselves the new gods. Or ultimately, we have it to where Mr. Wednesday and the people that he works with are kind of the old gods. So it's like old fighting new. So we ultimately have media now in some kind of old fashioned Esh like dress where I don't know where the reference of her being in this dress is. Maybe Pride and Prejudice. I don't know. I don't know where this dress comes from. But anyways, so we have it to where media is talking to the god of Easter, and Odin kind of interrupts this whole meeting, and so reasonably we have it to where Mr. World comes in and Technical Boy comes in, and so ultimately we have it to where Odin or to where Mr. Wednesday ultimately reveals that he's like, yeah, I've gone by many names, and he names all the names, and ultimately he mentions that he's like, yeah, I'm Odin, and because ultimately Shadow Moon is ultimately gonna finally know that Mr. Wednesday is now Odin, and so Odin is going to use his power, and he's going to try to take out Media, Technical Boy, and Mr. World, and so ultimately he hits all of them, but not enough to kill any of them, just to like get them to like, hey, like I'm putting my foot down, but ultimately like I'm not gonna kill you all. It's just like, hey, like, and ultimately Mr. God is like, dude, he could have killed me, but he didn't. So, because ultimately, I don't know what Odin's game plan is. Is Odin's game plan maybe to scare them, or maybe like Odin just really wants this war to happen? Uh, we ultimately have it to where reasonably after Odin like takes down his competition, ultimately Easter, the god of Easter is ultimately just like, dude, I'm not fighting for your guys' side. I'm not in any part of this. Ultimately, Easter was talking to media, and she was just like if anything, uh, like Easter or media hasn't been doing Easter any favors, and so ultimately, Easter is going to be even much more neutral. So Easter goes off and eventually finds the leprechaun, and the leprechaun is mentioning how, like, I want you to resurrect Laura. Evidently, she's dead, and so reasonably, I want you to resurrect her. So Easter is looking her up and down. Is like, okay, like maybe I'll try to resurrect her. Ultimately, we have it to where eventually the ice cream truck that Laura and Leprechaun were in ultimately crashed, and the leprechaun was going to try and uh, try to get the coin from out of Laura's belly, but Laura woke up and ultimately slapped him. And to where they're like, well, like you tried, but no. So we have it to where Easter is looking Laura up and down and ultimately trying to figure out how she died or what was the reason why she died. And ultimately Laura like tells her how she dies, but Easter is just like, no, that's not exactly going to work. Like we need to know why. What is the real main reason for why you died? Like what is the overall like? What was the first step into pointing out to you by someone from the beyond that it's your turn, it's your time kind of thing, and so we have it to where Easter is going like, oh, well, I can't actually resurrect this girl because ultimately she had been killed by a god. That's different. So ultimately, like, we find out that the that Mr. Wednesday had Laura killed, and ultimately, the leprechaun had some kind of part in that. So and I guess the leprechaun had felt guilty, so hence why he's trying to resurrect Laura. But it seems that ultimately, since this isn't going to work, we have it to where the leprechaun is talking to Laura and is like, well, hey, like, well, I think it's time for us to try another option. But, like, how much do you really want to be, like, resurrected kind of thing? Like, this is, like, I bet this is going to cost her a lot. Probably cost her, like, something in the afterlife, I'm assuming. Um, and so, because really we have at this point Laura like is having bugs all fly around her, and ultimately she is just kind of like she's decomposing and she's barfing, and like it's just a matter of time before ultimately she's gonna kick the bucket if she doesn't get resurrected. So pushing on, so we have it to where a war is brewing, and so like now we're into the very next episode, and so we have it to where there are gods that forcibly have to all meet in this seemingly one museum-esh like place. And so it has it to where ultimately we are having Mr. Wednesday all call upon all these people to all meet in this museum. Mr. Wednesday, Shadow Moon's there, uh, the Leprechaun is there, but ultimately he's not really a real part in this whole like gathering. Mr. Nancy's there, the Jinn is there. Ultimately, Salim ultimately tracks the Jinn down and ultimately is like, hey, like you and me, like we're like I'm gonna follow you to wherever you're gonna go, and ultimately the whole entire time, Salim's ultimately gonna pray the entire way. Uh, we also have some other gods as well as some ones that we are familiar with. Uh, Chesenobog ultimately comes along with you Zoria, and she is also there to ultimately kind of be a part of Mr. Wednesday's team, let's just say. We also have seemingly a. I think Mama G. I could be wrong about that. Mm, there's just another god that's also there. Bilquist is also there, and there's some other god that I think is like an Indian god, but I don't remember like what that actually is. Sadly, um, so we go on here and uh we have to where Shadow Moon is with all of these guys, and they're ultimately kind of contemplating whether or not to be at war or not. The old gods are kind of contemplating whether or not to be in war or not, and they're just kind of like, maybe we shouldn't go to war. Like, maybe we should give up on all this. Maybe we should just kind of separate and just kind of try our luck. And ultimately, at this point, every single one of these gods are all in their absolutely true form. We see Mr. Nancy's true form. We see Mr. Wednesday as Odin, and so on and so forth. And we ultimately have it to where Shadow Moon is at this uh, conversation, this round table. Because ultimately, before that, they were getting these cards from this fortune teller telling them their fortune. And I thought that was interesting. They were all getting coins from the Jinn, and eventually Laura um, and the Leprechaun were forcing themselves to get coins, and so ultimately we have it to where uh, Laura didn't get a fortune because she's dead, and uh, the leprechaun ended up getting his fortune, which he thought it was weird. So we ultimately have it to where Laura is ultimately just tying herself on to Shadow Moon because ultimately she can seemingly track him from anywhere. It seems like she has a visual like radar sense of where Shadow Moon is, so she's ultimately just continuously following him. So we have it to where Shadow Moon is talking to these guys and ultimately just kind of working them up and just saying, like, you know what? Before all this, I had no belief system. Like, I didn't believe in jack crap nothing. But ultimately, like, now that you guys are all here, and ultimately, like, I'm seeing that you guys, like, are kind of interested in fighting, but you're kind of just like, man, I'm not sure. Like, come on. Like, if anything, like I'm believing in Mr. Wednesday. I'm believing in Odin. I'm believing in you guys, all of you guys, and I want you guys to all like win this fight. I want you guys to to do this, and ultimately all the gods are like, yeah, like he's having like a real true uh he's having a real true like, yeah, like we're gonna believe what he says. We're gonna go with what he says. Um Jacenobog ultimately is only here because reasonably we have to where Shadow Moon ultimately beat him in the second game of checkers, which ultimately like, oh, okay, so they did play a second game, and ultimately Jacenobog is ultimately mentioning how like to Shadow Moon, it's like, well, hey, how about we play a third game? How about we play a third game of checkers? And ultimately, if you lose that one, then I'll come for your head, kind of thing. It's kind of nice and kind of interesting, kind of dialogue between all these people. Eventually, we have Mr. Wednesday again talking to Zoria, ultimately to kind of hit on her again. Ultimately, she makes some uh, like comment about his silver tongue or whatever, and ultimately. Mr. Wednesday is like, well, I've never had a complaint. I've never had complaints about my tongue. Like, kind of really cementing these two characters have had a relationship together, and I thought that these moments were really just fascinating. So, pushing on, so we have it to where all of them are just really excited that they're all going into war. Everybody's going to a bar together to celebrate that they're quite possibly going to go into war. And so, really, everyone's getting together and everybody's figuring out what their strategies are and everything like that. We have, I think, the Indian god that is mentioning, like, well, hey, like, I'm gonna try to battle my way all through this. like a with the exception of unless I can't be able to switch my shift with some douchebaggery guy to ultimately get my schedule shift, because this girl like works at some establishment somewhere, like some kind of like nine to five job. So pushing on, so you have it to where these guys are all like having a good time. They're all at this like diner or whatever, and they're all just like drinking away, and ultimately just like, yeah, like we're hoping for the best for all this. And so we have it to where Mr. World is ultimately just kind of like he like he's plotting his evil scheme. He is ultimately telling him, it's like, well, like, hey, like I'm kind of like I'm done with all these old gods. It's like I'm kind of like, if anything, like they've had their time in the sun, but ultimately now it's my turn. And ultimately, Odin had his shot, but he missed. So it's now my turn. It's now my play. So we have it to where seemingly that Mr. World hired a sniper to take out the people that are in this restaurant or whatever. And so we have it to where this sniper is ultimately laser pointingly shooting people down, and reasonably the only person that I think I saw reasonably got hit was Zoria. And ultimately we have it to where Mr. Wednesday is kind of like going to Zoria and just like in an utter loss. And we have it to where Shadow Moon is ultimately trying to figure out where this sniper is coming from, ultimately to the point of him going out and trying to take out this sniper, which he does. And he ultimately ends up getting sucked into some kind of like spaceship, it looked like to me. He ended up getting like sucked into the sky, weirdly enough. Um, so we have Zoria, who is ultimately being comforted by Mr. Wednesday until she dies, and Xenobog is ultimately mentioning, it's like, whoever killed her, like I'm gonna put a curse on them. It's uh like there is no way that you're gonna be able to uh get your blood spilled by an enemy, or like there's no way that you're gonna relish in this war or anything like that, that you're gonna die an honorable death or whatever, like I'm coming for you kind of thing. Told me to say, it's like I'm gonna come for you before um you get any honorable death. Because ultimately, earlier they talk about Valhalla, and I'm like, okay, well that's of course like Norris speak um, about them talking about Valhalla, and ultimately, I guess like uh, Checkensabog is ultimately trying to say, it's like, dude, there's no way that you're gonna go to Valhalla after um, after what you've done. So we ultimately have it to where bizarrely we have it to where Shadow Moon is ultimately abducted, seemingly bizarrely, and we ultimately find out that he ultimately is being like has all these like medical like devices like kind of like put all over his body, and it seems like he's repetitiously getting tortured. Ultimately to be asked like, hey, we don't know much about your background story, and ultimately we are like trying to figure you out. It seems that all like you have is just like all your backstory is just you and the backstory of your mother. Why is it that we don't know much more than that? Ultimately, I'm trying to figure out who is the guy that was torturing him, and that is probably going to take forever. Come on. Come on. Roll of the dice here. Oh, Dane Cook was Robbie. Oh, that's great. Come on. Roll of the dice a little bit longer. Come on. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Oh God, come on. Mr. Town. Good God, Mr. Town ultimately is the guy that is torturing. Holy crap, that took forever. So Mr. Town is ultimately going and asking uh, uh, Shadow Moon all these questions. Ultimately, Shadow Moon is hooked up to this device, and ultimately, it's just kind of having us a flashback of or a flashback of Shadow Moon's life. How ultimately he was a kid that ultimately would get beaten up because his skin looked a certain tone, and so ultimately like people were confusing him with either not being, let's just say, black enough at some points, I guess. So they ultimately were kind of confusing his skin tone, and ultimately that's where he would just get beaten the crap out of, I guess. So the ultimate avatar of Shadow Moon ultimately uh is ultimately to be kind of like we're showcasing him and his mother, and I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was kind of really cool for us to get a little bit of Shadow Moon's backstory with his mother and stuff like that. Because ultimately they alluded to his mother, but there was not much else than that. But ultimately, when looking at this full fledgedly, I didn't get anything out of this that I could invest more in this character with. I couldn't see this going like, oh yeah, I'm really gonna just even more invest in Shadow Moon if I wasn't already. Um, because really the whole like Shadow Moon going to prison for Laura's crime kind of thing was all that I really needed to invest in Shadow Moon. Ultimately, them telling us that Shadow Moon had uh, taken someone else's crime and just kind of while he was in jail, we had Laura who was kind of like cheating on him with some other man. Like that was enough to make me invest in Shadow Moon to care about this character. We didn't need this flashback stuff in season 2 to make me invest in Shadow Moon more because I didn't after this whole flashback scenario. So we have it to where Laura can track Shadow Moon. So while they kind of had like barely a glimpse of time where Laura was with Shadow Moon in the bar and ultimately just kind of like consistently just kind of seeing him here or there, Shadow Moon ultimately tracks, or Laura ultimately tracks Shadow Moon via this train. So ultimately, they were keeping him onto this train. Ultimately, doing the Morbius like torture thing to ultimately make Shadow Moon crack. But Shadow Moon doesn't have the information that they're looking for to unlock maybe quite possibly who Shadow Moon's father was, because Shadow Moon's father has to have some probably maybe significance of uh why he was chosen for this. Like at some point they ask like why was Shadow Moon chosen, and Odin just tries to say it's like, oh well no, like he's just like he's just the X factor. He's the placebo. Like all of these other people are all gods, but he is just a normal average Joe. That's why I picked him. Which I'm like, no, there's got to be something more to this. It can't just be that this guy is just a normal average Joe. That doesn't make sense to me anymore. Like that's like there's something bigger here that ultimately is tying in with Shadow Moon, and it can't just be like that. Like all this, what is Shadow Moon like the god of thunder or something? Which wouldn't make sense because he has something to do with weather. Uh, like what was Shadow Moon's father, the god of weather, and ultimately he ultimately just had a baby be popping out because ultimately I know full well like Zeus had like numerous of just random children all over the place. So maybe the god of weather ultimately just laid down with some woman and just had a baby because that could have happened. So ultimately, we could have Shadow Moon being a, I guess, if you remember the movie Clash of Titans, maybe he's like a half god. Maybe he's half human, half god. So who knows? So going into this, we have eventually Laura rescuing Shadow Moon from this weird, bizarrish torture apparatus. And reasonably, I think for me, that's just kind of how the second episode just ends. And so, reasonably, yeah, it's kind of weird for me to be able to quite easily just kind of run through these episodes and just kind of talk about them. Because ultimately, I would just assume that these would be taking like hours upon hours to do, or like especially just doing 2 episodes. But even with all the stuff that's going on, I think I can kind of easier kind of narrow it down a little bit more of what is really important to mention and talk about. Uh, but yeah, I really enjoyed these episodes. They were kind of interesting to just kind of like it's kind of pulling consistently at uh that Shadow Moon is a bigger like there's got to be something a key bigger thing with Shadow Moon because ultimately Mr. Wednesday had to kill Laura so that way Shadow Moon had absolutely nothing to keep him away from working with Mr. Wednesday because Shadow Moon had nothing and no one, and so really he was stuck working with Mr. Wednesday. Uh, so like somebody put a hit out on Laura, and so we're gonna figure out exactly all the pieces of that, and so on and so forth. Um, and how really Mr. Wednesday is desperately telling Shadow Moon, it's like, hey, like don't go with that girl. Don't tie yourself onto that girl because I need you. I need you to work for me. And just kind of some fascinating things going on with this story. And who knows how this is all going to just keep churning out because when looking at it again, I'm still a little bit worried about these stories because ultimately knowing full well that like the people that kind of worked on this show kind of gave up gave up the whole writing thing of really putting forth an effort to write this show. So I'm just kind of waiting for there to be like a heavy, clunky amount of like just like yeah these episodes like where did like where did all the cool writing go into where did all the like really interesting things go into here um and I hope we're gonna get some really like I hope this ending to this second season is going to be really much better than the first season. Um, but yeah, so I don't know. I'm just kind of still fascinated about all this, but I also feel like there's sometimes where like they don't really explain everything and they just kind of like sweep some stuff under the rug kind of some stuff is just kind of quickly just like forgotten about kind of like Bill Quist kind of joining this team of Mr. Wednesday was just kind of like swept under the rug to just kind of like resolve that character, and I thought that that was kind of crappy. I was like, yeah, she's just a part of this team now, and yay! Because and ultimately we have it to where Bill Quist ultimately kisses Laura, which I kind of thought I was like, okay, so what is Bill Quist and Laura just gonna end up with one another? That'd be kind of interesting, but I don't know. We'll see where that goes. Uh, because ultimately like Bill Quist kind of like talks with Laura in this bar, and ultimately Bill Quist is ultimately like oh like talking to Laura, and she's like oh well you're with Shadow Moon, and ultimately like Laura's like yeah, like kind of reconfirming that um, that Laura is going to end up with Shadow Moon, and no one else is going to be like in her way to get back to him, which I thought was really interesting. Because ultimately Laura could just be like, well, F it, and like, Because ultimately she was with Robbie while Shadow Moon was in prison, and I just like I'm trying to put the pieces together of why Laura is so like adamantly like no, I'm going to go back with Shadow Moon. Because ultimately she could have just been like F it, like I'm just gonna do whatever now. Like I'll be with the Leprechaun, I don't care. Like whatever happens, happens. But I don't know why. Like ultimately, yeah, the the kiss that Shadow Moon had started her heart, and I guess maybe Laura kissing Bilquist was maybe thinking that uh, there was going to have some interaction with her in her heart, but nothing happened. So looking at it, like I guess Shadow Moon is the only person that could really actually restart Laura's heart, and so yeah, that was really interesting to figure that out. So other than that, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about these two episodes. Really, I'm still trying to figure out like when they introduce somebody, like who the f they are. Eventually, I'm hoping to eventually figure out a lot of these stuffs or a lot of these things as we go. But there's a lot of times where there's still a lot of just like follow the bouncing ball going on to here and try to figure out who everyone is and like the reasoning for why they're in here and try to decipher a lot of stuff. And I think that that's kind of intriguing. To ultimately just go in here and just be like, oh, okay, well, is this person gonna have a reasonably like cool name? No, they're gonna have some flimsy name. Like Mr. Wood, ultimately was just kind of like, man, Mr. Wood, ultimately that like, man, that's garbage. That's a kind of stupid name. I'm hoping that maybe Mr. Wood, the god of forest, probably has something still up his sleeve, maybe in any number of these episodes, but I could be wrong. I'm assuming maybe they're just going to have that be just a thing and ultimately just forget all about it. Uh, but I don't know. I just want everything to have like um, its silver lining, or I want to have it have like it's like I want everything to have meaning in here, and I want everything to just have like a good, like again, I don't want everything to just be like swept under the rug or just finished up. And I think Mr. Wood, like I don't think he was like swept under the like. I think he was just kind of there to kill some people in the police station. But I'm ultimately just like, well, yeah, but like that seems to have like an unstoppable threat going. So I'm assuming that eventually they're going to come back to that thing and ultimately uh, have that be like round two kind of thing. But who knows? So other than that, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.